So welcome everybody to this first class of this year of 2023 of the series Landscape Success. My name is Suma Mudan and I have been a Master Gardener for, oh my gosh, 9 years already. It's been a very long time. And I'm helping the Master Gardeners and Texas AgriLife with these classes, these series of classes, and Nancy is our programs director. So we have 8 classes lined up for you guys this year, and all these classes are aimed at helping the home gardener to go step by step on each aspect of the gardening. So you will have a gradual increase of the knowledge as you attend these classes. I'm sure many of you have been gardening for a long time, but all of us always get to learn something new with each talk. So even though we think that we might have heard it before, but it gives us a new idea when we listen to these presentations. So today I have the pleasure of introducing to you our speaker. For all of us in the gardening community and Fort Bend Master Gardeners and Texas A&M AgriLife, Peggy is a very, very, very well-known person, Peggy Hemacote. She has been with the Master Gardeners since 2003. I thought 2014 is old, but 2003 is older. So she has been around for a long time as a gardener and as an office bearer in the Master Gardeners. She is also not just a Master Gardener, she is certified as advanced trained in earth-kind landscaping in 2015. And she enjoys sharing her earth-kind landscaping knowledge with the others. She's also maintaining the earth-kind garden in Richmond for the city of Richmond. So if you have a chance, you should both visit our demonstration gardens in Rosenberg as well as the earth-kind garden in Richmond. So Peggy has been a past president of Fort Bend Master Gardeners, and not just the president, wherever there was a need, she always wore that hat, she always stepped up, and she always did more than what is asked of her. So she has been a stable source of inspiration, motivation for many of us, and she has given to the community classes willingly, openly, gladly. She currently serves as the president of Fort Bend County Agricultural and Horticultural Advisory Committee. She lives in Richmond area where she and her husband enjoy gardening for wildlife, especially for birds. She is a graduate of the University of Houston with a bachelor's degree in business and enjoyed a career in human resources in the oil and gas industry. She served as president of HR Houston in 2001 and 2002. One interesting and very inspiring fact about Peggy's garden is she uses minimal water. Her entire garden survives without pampering, without like doing all kinds of things. The plants are happy and grow very well. So with all that introduction, I'm sure you all are waiting for Peggy to get started, and the floor is yours, Peggy. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Suma. I appreciate that. Very kind introduction. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for spending an hour and a half with us this afternoon. I don't want to take anything for granted. I hope that you're familiar with who we are. But by chance, if you're not, I want to acquaint you just very briefly with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And I'll do that very simply by reading to you the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service mission statement. It reads as follows. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service works daily to make Texas better by providing innovative solutions at the intersection of agriculture, natural resources, youth, and health, thereby improving the well-being of individuals, families, businesses, and communities through education and service. The Fort Bend County Master Gardeners are trained volunteers who assist Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in educating the community using research-based horticultural information, such as we're doing today with this Landscape Basics class. I'm talking to you today from the offices of the Fort Bend AgriLife Extension Service here in Rosenberg. Their address is 1402 Band Road near the Fort Bend County Fairgrounds. So anytime you need an assist, that's where you'll find them. So that's me, as Suma said. I really like this topic, Earthkind Landscaping, and I practice what I preach. And I'm happy to share my knowledge with you today. My goal is to lay a foundation for you for landscape success using Earthkind principles. I'm going to cover a whole lot of ground in a short period of time, and I'm going to be flying at a pretty high altitude. But as we go along, I'm going to be giving you some basics, and I'm going to be pointing you in the direction of where you can find more resources. And some of the topics I'll touch on today will be dealt with in later landscape success classes here in 2023. And I'll point that out as we go along in case there's a topic on which you want to take a deeper dive. And when we get to the end of this talk, we'll look at the entire schedule of classes so that you can think about what else you might want to tune into later. Today, we're talking landscape basics. So your landscape, well, what's that mean? Well, it's what you and others see around your house and your other buildings. It's not just about flowering plants. It includes your lawn, your trees, your planting beds, your hardscapes like your patios, and it has spatial features, just like a home. It has, or maybe you wish it had, ceilings of trees and arbors, walls of shrubs and vines, and floors of lawns or ground covers and hardscapes. Well-designed landscapes have real value to you. They enhance the beauty and the value of our homes. They create a place for us to relax and play and enjoy nature and being outdoors. And if they're well designed, they should be low maintenance and sustainable. You know, most of us want a beautifully landscaped yard with lots of curb appeal where we can enjoy ourselves, but we don't want to spend all of our time and money maintaining it. When you achieve low maintenance and sustainability, you're going to derive maximum enjoyment. And a way to do that is to adopt Earthkind landscaping principles. Earthkind is a landscape management system. It was created by horticultural specialists, agents, and volunteers of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service with help from industry representatives. It's the fastest growing university program of its kind in the nation. And as you can see by the registered trademark sign next to the words Earthkind, it is federally registered as a trademark of Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in order to protect its educational focus, its use, and its integrity. So Earthkind landscaping is a set of landscaping principles to create a horticultural system based on real-world effectiveness. It's based on research-proven techniques. It combines the best of organic and traditional practices and principles. It enables us to have all the gardening pleasure we can stand while still preserving and protecting the environment. I'd like you to think about that phrase, real-world effectiveness. That refers to the processes that occur in nature without human intervention. You know, in nature, in natural places, plants don't need us. They grow where they're supposed to grow, where they're well adapted to climate and soils and shade and sun conditions. They take their nourishment from the soil, and that soil is continually replenished by the decomposition of fallen leaves and other organic matter. And that decomposition process returns nutrients to the soil, maintaining soil's fertility. In healthy ecosystems, plants and other living organisms coexist, in mutually beneficial relationships. Earth-kind landscaping teaches us how to imitate these natural processes in our own landscapes. It encourages water conservation. That's important because there are times when Texas water supply is under pressure. We have ever increasing growing populations. We experience seasonal fluctuations in rainfall. Sometimes, very often, we have periodic droughts. And it's been estimated that 31% of Texas potable water supplies are used on our landscapes and gardens. And in the summertime, that usage can be more like 60 to 70%. And it's also been said by researchers that half of the water we put on our yards and gardens may never be taken up by the plants that we're trying to support. So water conservation is important. Earth-kind landscaping also encourages landscaping for energy conservation. We can significantly change the microclimate around our homes, making it more efficient and reducing our energy costs. If we properly place shrubs and vines and trees, we can keep our homes warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Earth-kind landscaping encourages reduction of fertilizer and pesticide use. And that's important because those products can harm the environment if they flow off of our property and pollute streams and rivers, lakes, and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. And lastly, it encourages a reduction of yard wastes that are entering our landfills. You know, every year, millions of tons of leaves, weeds, grass clippings, tree limbs, organic debris, and other yard waste end up in our Texas landfills. It's been estimated that about 20% of all trash placed in landfills comes from our yards. And that costs Texans over $300 million a year to collect and dispose of that yard waste. So Earth-kind landscaping is organized, if you will, around 7 principles. And the rest of my talk with you today is going to touch on each one of these 7 principles. I'll give you an overview and some links to resources where you can learn more. And some of these will be dealt with in future classes this year during our Landscape Success series. If you're not familiar with earth-kind landscaping, maybe you've heard of xeriscaping. Well, please don't equate the two. They are not the same. The Xeriscape program was founded in the 1980s in Denver as a means of encouraging people to conserve water, but it's not thought to be very aesthetically pleasing to those of us who are traditional gardeners. And that's because this is what most people think about when they think about or when they hear the term xeriscape. Well, that is not what I'm here to talk to you about today. I want you to think about this. An earth-kind landscape can be green. It should be green. It should be cool. It should be full of your favorite plants and maintained with water-efficient practices. The same lush, green, Texas-style landscape to which we're accustomed can be achieved and still conserve water. So let's begin with the first earth-kind principle of planning and design. And by the way, I'll pause after covering each one of these principles and see if Suma has any questions. You can put your questions in the chat, and at the end of each section of this talk, we'll stop and take a few questions that you put in the chat. So planning and design. Having a plan is the starting point for success. A friend of mine once told me, Peggy, if you don't know where you're going, don't be surprised when you get there. And I've had a few of those experiences. I began landscaping a bare yard in the Richmond area 30 years ago. There was 1 tree on 2 acres, and we built a house. So I had this blank slate. and I was eager to fill it because I was already a gardening enthusiast at the time. But I didn't get started with the plan. A few years into it, I brought in a landscaper who helped me create a plan and built some beds, which are very functional for me today. But I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm still correcting some of those mistakes, especially related to the placement of large trees that are now mature. I never realized when I planted trees that I could cart home myself in a pot, and my husband and I could plant. 30 years ago, I wasn't smart enough to think about the mature size and breadth of those trees, and we're dealing with those problems today. Limbs of live oak trees encroaching on a driveway, and what started out to be sunny flower beds now turned into shady flower beds, and I'm having to change my plant selections. Had I been smarter about planning and design, I might have spared myself some grief over the last 30 years. So what Earthkind Landscaping teaches us is to take some time to do some planning and literally do it on paper. Make a sketch of your property to scale. Put your house and other structures on it. Note your easements, your walks, your drives, your fences. Mark your sketch with the existing trees and shrubs and your planting beds and the areas that are grass. And you probably you may have something in your files. If you own a house, you might have gotten a plot plan when you purchased your house that's drawn to scale. You can use that as your starting point. And when you get this sketch of your property made, note your compass headings on it and your prevailing wind directions. And then sit back and think about what you want or need to satisfy your gardening requirements, your landscaping requirements. For example, do you wish you had more privacy in a certain part of your yard? Or conversely, do you wish some of your views were more opened up? Would you like to see more out that kitchen window, for example? Do you need a different play area for your children? Or maybe you need to create a play area for your children. Do you need a work or service area? Do you want to have a better spot for outdoor entertaining? And are you concerned about the areas that are visible to the public? And do you want to, improve on those? So make a list, prioritize what you want to get out of your landscape plan. And then get started designing your dream landscape. Now, don't mess up that sketch that you made to scale. Of course, you could make a bunch of copies of it, I suppose, but you can keep the one sketch, put tracing paper over the top, and start designing to your heart's content. You can add, remove, or reshape your planting beds. You can add or remove trees. You can think about how much grass you have and maybe reduce the amount of grass, but keep enough to satisfy your needs. You might even add patios, pathways, a pergola. But we also want you to consider ways to make your landscape more earth-kind. So I'm going to talk now about earth-kind landscaping design objectives. They are these 4. Notice we're not talking about plants yet. We're talking about landscape design, but we haven't started talking about plant selection. That'll come later. The earth-kind landscaping design objectives are low maintenance, energy conservation, water conservation, and lifestyle. Earth-kind means having a beautiful landscape that satisfies these conditions and check off each one of them. Make sure you check all the boxes. So there are some physical and environmental elements of design that are important when you do landscape planning. You've got to think of sunlight and shade. Those 2 things are deciding factors in plant selection. You've got to think about your soil conditions. how often do we do that? I mean, we take for granted that our soil is our soil and we just plant in it. And maybe it's not in great condition. Soil's important because it anchors our plants, obviously, but it also stores water and nutrients that the plants need. And it provides habitat for earthworms and microbes and other organisms that are important to plant health. And its chemical and its physical properties can greatly affect our plants' performance. When we're doing landscape design, we've got to think about structures, both overhead and underground. Things like your power lines and buried utility lines and your irrigation pipes before we start digging new beds or planting trees whose canopies might interfere with those overhead structures or whose roots might interfere with buried structures. And as I've mentioned in my own experience, always consider the mature height and width of plants when we select them. And remember that a tree's root system is going to extend well beyond the breadth of its canopy when it's mature. We can consider wind and windbreaks. You know, if you have a windbreak, which could be a group of plants or buildings, you can have protection from cold winds, which will help your plants survive in the winter. And you can also have protection from those warm breezes we get in the summer, which result in evaporative loss of water in our plants. And then lastly, a physical and environmental element of design is taking advantage of your slope and drainage. Now, what I'm about to say might be counterintuitive because most of the time we think, oh my goodness, I want my yard to drain well. But earth-kind landscaping teaches us to try to retain as much water as we can on our landscape in such a way that it can penetrate deep into the soil, which benefits the landscape and reduces runoff. And I'll talk more about that in just a bit. So as you're thinking about landscape design, think about these physical and environmental elements and recognize where shade comes from in your yard. As you look at this diagram, you know, you have the sun changing positions in the sky through the seasons, and you've got structures like your house and your fences and your trees that are creating shade differently, I suspect, at different times of the year. So it's quite tricky. Another element of earth-kind landscape design is to landscape for energy conservation. Large trees that shade our roof and our walls and our windows at home from afternoon sun can reduce temperatures inside our house by as much as 8 to 10 degrees. And deciduous trees, which drop their leaves in the winter, can provide summer shade when their leaves are on the trees, but when they drop their leaves in the wintertime, they can allow the sun's rays to filter through the canopy and reach our roof and our windows and helping to warm the house. It's really, really important if you're thinking about adding a tree to your landscape that you understand what you're selecting. I put on this slide a great resource. It's a website, texastreeplanting.tamu.edu. I hope you'll visit it if you're thinking about trees. It's designed for us. In other words, you put the county of Texas in which you live in a tool on that website. And then you tell the search engine what you're looking for in your tree selection. A tall one, a short one, a deciduous one, an evergreen one that blooms, one that doesn't. And then it produces a list of trees that meet your criteria that would be recommended for the county in which you live. This is important because large trees that get 35 feet tall or more, 20 years after you've planted them, shouldn't be placed closer than about 15 to 20 feet from the side of your house. And yards are getting smaller and smaller in our neighborhoods anymore. So some of the trees that we might be inclined to select might not be very suitable for small yards. So it's important to do some research about trees. And landscaping for water conservation. Earthkind focuses heavily on this and recommends that we group our plants according to their water needs. It refers to these as zones. And that's because we can irrigate them appropriately. For example, a regular watering zone would be one that has the greatest water needs. In other words, things in that zone need water weekly. It's things like your lawn, your tender annuals and perennials, and your fruit and your vegetable gardens. Of course, some of that water, hopefully all of it, can come from rainfall. But when it doesn't, we have to supplement it. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is a zone where you have to provide little or no supplemental irrigation. This is commonly referred to as the natural rainfall zone. This is where you'd have your native and other drought-tolerant plants. Most of my yard is this. I don't have an irrigation system, and whatever nature provides keeps those plants alive and keeps me happy. And then there's another group of plants that might need some supplemental irrigation once or twice a month if no rain falls. And that includes most of our herbaceous perennials and our ornamental grasses. So when you design your landscape with water conservation in mind, it will dictate where you position plants in the landscape. And you'll be able to use if you have an automated irrigation system, you'll be able to manage those zones in such a way that you're providing enough water when you need to provide it, but not too much. So that's the end of my planning and design section. Suma, do you have a couple of questions that you'd like me to address?
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions that probably you can address. So one is how HOAs generally go by the norm that, no, that's mine. Okay, what is the best way to convince HOAs of established communities to allow the reduction of large tree requirements on residential properties?
That is a challenge that we talk about perennially, pardon the pun, here in the Master Gardener organization. We know that's a challenge. I know of one community that has 3 oak trees in a postage stamp size front yard. Yeah. One of them's planted between the sidewalk and the street, and the other 2 are in the front yard between the sidewalk and the house. And every yard in the neighborhood has the same 3 oak trees. I suppose there are ways that residents and organizations with HOAs could use some of the resources that I'm pointing out to you today to sort of share what they've learned with their HOA in a constructive manner. For example, I think that if you wanted to submit a proposal to your HOA that you'd like to remove a tree but replace it with something else, if you gathered the information that the websites I'm talking to you about today contain, you could make a very powerful argument that you're doing the right thing. But chances are that's going to have to happen on a case-by-case basis. It's a lot about the developer, I think, sometimes, and then the HOA inherits what the developer intended, and there's a period of time when changes are hard to make. Not a very good answer, perhaps, but it's the best one I've got today.
Yeah.
Peggy and Suma, Nancy Sheff. I'll chime in a little bit. I was on a HOA board for a while, and the first thing you need to do is see what Peggy said, what your deed restrictions for your neighborhood is stating about what sort of trees you're required to have in your front yard. And usually they'll say either the
We
and
lost.
because you agreed legally when you bought the house, you have to go by your deed restrictions. So that's one of the problems. It's very hard to change deed restrictions. But you also have an HOA board, which is generally your neighbors in that neighborhood. So the next thing is what Peggy said, is educating them. Send them information about trees and problems. And I did this on my board, and we've been able to change it so residents could, if there was a problem with trees with foundation issues, they could go back and put in a smaller tree. But it depends on your HOA board, how much they're willing to go on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Nancy. And we feel your pain, folks out there. We understand what you're dealing with, but this research-based information that Texas A&M AgriLife Extension makes available to you all can be very powerful if you find yourself in that situation. Yeah. Is there another question before I move on, Suma?
Yeah, so there is a second question regarding turf grass. I already mentioned that we are having a full-fledged class next month. But this question was about what can we plant, what type of grass can we plant under big oak trees?
That's a very good question, and another one that commonly happens in talks like this, because we all know that once the shade happens, the St. Augustine grass doesn't want to grow. I personally don't know the answer to the question. If you're looking for another turf grass to plant, I have heard it recommended by Texas A&M AgriLife Extension that those areas underneath oak trees that are shady could possibly be replanted with ground covers, things that are more shade tolerant than grass. When I get to the end of this talk, I'm going to be showing you a slide which contains information about how to contact us. The Fort Bend County Master Gardeners staff a hotline, as we call it, 5 days a week during the week. You can send questions like this to our hotline through our website, and people will research the answers to your questions and get back to you. I know a lot of things after being a master gardener for 20 years, but I by no means know everything, and I'm just not going to venture a guess. But send that question to our hotline. I know they've answered it before, and they'll probably have some good advice for you. But I think if you're looking for another turf grass, it's probably not going to be in the cards. I figure I would have known that by now in 20 years if such a solution existed, but get another opinion. Okay, in the interest of time, I think I should move on, but if time permits at the end, we can take more questions.
Yes.
And I may be covering some of the questions that are coming up. Okay with you, Suma?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So the next earth kind principle, the next earth kind principle is titled Practical Turf Areas. Here's your turf grass. Of course, grass has a lot of benefits. It provides recreational services for our kids. It reduces noise and heat around our homes. It unifies a design, and it harvests water. Have you ever thought about that? Harvesting water, when you think about grass, harvesting water means it helps to eliminate runoff. Rainfall hits those blades of grass. The grass blades funnel the rainfall down to the soil surface. And if it doesn't rain too much too fast, it has a chance to soak into the ground. I have read that turf grass lawn is second only to a virgin forest in its ability to harvest water and recharge groundwater resources. So having grass is good, much better than having bare soil, right? On the other hand, turf grass tends to be our heaviest user of irrigation water. So when we talk about practical turf areas, we're really suggesting have enough, but not too much. If you look at the two pictures on this slide, the one on the top left gives you a nice aerial view of what most of us get when we buy a house in a typical neighborhood with a small lot. You get the house, you get the concrete driveways, sidewalks, and the street, and everything between the house and the concrete is filled in with grass. That lawn isn't really a design element in the classical sense, but rather it's filling space. And sometimes it creates problems for you in irrigation, and you end up with these difficult corners that are hard to mow. On the other hand, the picture down on the right, if you can imagine one of those rectangular backyards re-landscaped something like this, where you had planting beds, raised planting beds around the perimeter of the yard with these nice curving borders and enough turf grass in the middle to satisfy your needs for grass, but the grass actually becomes part of the landscape design. It's a design element, not filler. So that's what we're talking about practical turf when we talk about practical turf areas. A good rule of thumb in landscape design is to have equal parts turf grass, planting beds, and hardscapes, which are your decks, patios, and your gravel walkways, for example. So impractical turf areas include these long, narrow strips that are difficult to irrigate and maintain. You see them in parking lots a lot, right? Like this picture. There's an irrigation system. It comes on like clockwork, and most of the water, I would venture to say, is going right onto that concrete surface and down the drain. That's what you're trying to avoid. You could, if this was at your home, you could perhaps landscape that strip with ground covers, something that didn't need regular irrigation, perhaps. And then if, like the picture we talked about in the last slide, if you can eliminate those boxy areas of grass and use nice curves, you'll get a nice, pleasing landscape design, but still have some turf grass. And if you decide at home that you've got more grass than you'd like to have, you transition some of them to some perennial beds, perhaps, following landscape design principles of the tall stuff in the back, mid-accent pieces, mid-structure, and low color. Use native and well-adapted plants, and you don't have to water it as much, and you get a nice, appealing backyard. And sometimes people decide they don't want any lawn at all. You could substitute lawn with ground covers, with flower and shrub plantings, decks or patios, vegetable gardens, mulched areas. Look how attractive these photos are. It looks like the one on the bottom left might be a side yard. And the one that takes up most of the page of this slide is one of our favorite master gardeners. This is most of her backyard, where she's gotten rid of the grass and is having lots of fun growing things, as you can see. If you look to the back of this picture, she has a little turf grass back there off to the right, but it's not as much as most of us have. That's a big undertaking, but if you want to do it, it can be done. Now, as Suma's mentioned, our next landscape success class on March the 17th is on turf grass. So if you really want to get into the lawn issues, sign up for that one. All right, are there any questions you'd like me to take in this section, Suma?
I don't see any questions so far, Peggy.
Okay, good. Then let's move on to the next earth kind principle, which is appropriate plant selection. If we choose plants that are well adapted to our growing regions, our soil and our climate, they're going to have lower water demands, fewer pest problems, and less fertilizer needs than if we choose some of the non-adapted, more exotic plants that we sometimes bring into the landscape. So appropriate plant selection suggests that we combine some good Texas native plants like this Yaupon and berry in the top picture with well-adapted non-natives like the beautiful crepe myrtle that you see in the bottom. And we can end up with a beautiful quality landscape that conserves water and protects the environment. This is a screenshot of a website that I would, if you take nothing else from this class today, make note of this website. You'll see it many times. I'll give you the web address here in a few seconds. But the name of it is Aggie Horticulture. It's Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Services web page, and it's designed for us, homeowners, gardeners. Just take a quick look at what's on this site. There are fact sheets about growing fruits and nuts. There are fact sheets about vegetables, growing vegetables. Here's Earthkind Landscaping. That's where I'm taking you today. And there's a lot more resources here as you're about to learn. There's a link to the Texas Superstar website. Texas Superstars are plants that have been field tried and tested and proven to be Texas tough. You can't go wrong choosing Texas Superstar plants. But what I'm going to demonstrate for you a plant selector that's on this Earthkind Landscaping section of the website. So I'm going to, if we were live, I would be selecting Earthkind Landscaping, which would take me to the Earthkind Landscaping homepage, where you're going to find lots of good stuff. Some of it's cut off here. Notice this, I'm going to be talking about it later, taking the Earthkind challenge. We'll come back to that. Look, here's a publication on planning the home landscape, the Earthkind edition. I'm going to take you to the Earthkind Plant Selector, which is a database of plants that we can search. It's a searchable database. So to get started on this plant selector, we can either put in our zip codes or we can use our cursor to come down and choose our growing region. And Fort Bend County would be down here in Region G. And then we'll get to this page, which says, okay, what do you want to do? Search for plants in Region G, which is called Southeast Texas. And notice I have some options. I can search for a particular plant. I did this a while back. My shrimp plants weren't looking very happy, and I wasn't very happy that they weren't happy. So I went to the plant selector and I put in shrimp plant and went to that page, which explained to me what a shrimp plant wants and needs. And I could figure out what I was not doing and start doing it. And sure enough, they perked up. So you can use this as a diagnostic tool if you want to, but we're trying to use it as a plant selection tool. You can use drop-down boxes to choose certain growth habits or exposure to sun or shade. You can pick your blooming periods or your leaf character. But what I'm going to do in this simulation is generate a quick list. And most every plant in the database is assigned a numerical rating between 1 and 10. The higher the rating, the more resource efficient the plant. It's called the Earthkind rating, and I'm going to tell you about that now. The rating is based on a plant's tolerance for our heat, its drought tolerance, its pest tolerance, how picky it is about its soil requirements, and its fertility requirements. So those are the criteria that the Earth Kind rating is measuring. And the plants with a value of 8 or higher are considered to be extremely resource efficient and good choices for your particular growing region. So I'm going to generate a quick list, which is going to give me a list of all the plants in the database for this region that are rated 8 or higher. And when this was done, when this screenshot was taken, the database had produced a list of 223 plants. And you're able to scroll through several pages of these plants. And when you see something you like, you can choose it. Click on it. I'm going to select Turk's Cap, one of my favorite plants. And then that takes me to a page that's all about this plant called Turk's Cap. It describes it as an outstanding native Texas herbaceous perennial. It tells me that it spreads from root suckers and seeds. It's got dark green lobed red maple-like leaves. It's got 1-inch long upright red flowers. It's adaptable to sun or shade, but it's best in partial shade. It's excellent in naturalized landscapes, shaded understories. I'm thinking about that oak tree. Tall, it can be used as a tall ground cover, and it attracts hummingbirds. It tells me its bloom period from spring through fall. When it finishes blooming, it produces a red berry-like seed, which birds like. I've seen mockingbirds eating that seed from my Turk's Cap. And here's that Earth Kind index I was describing. This plant, Turk's Cap, has the highest Earth Kind index rating of 10. It tolerates our heat. It doesn't want supplemental water. It's not picky about what soil it's growing on. Pests don't bother it, and it doesn't need regular applications, or ever does it need applications of fertilizer. The perfect plant in my book. So that's an illustration of how one can use the Earth Kind plant selector, not only to learn more about the plants that you're already growing at home, but also to do some research before you head to the nursery and have a grocery list, so to speak, a plant list ready before you go shopping for plants, so that you're picking up the plants that you know are going to be resource efficient. Try not to make any more of those impulse buys that I've made a lot of over the years. But the Earth Kind plant selector isn't the only source of plant information you're going to find on the Aggie Horticulture webpage. There are more links there to the Texas Urban Landscape Guide, links to Texas native shrubs, the Texas Superstar plants, and you can read these on your own. If you want to add roses, Earth Kind roses are incredibly good choices for the landscape. So here's the website I've been telling you about, aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. Once you get there, you're going to find all of the rest of this good stuff and more. So once you've sort of done, getting back to this concept of landscape basics and landscape design, now we're talking about appropriate plant selection. Once you've figured out what resource efficient plants that you could grow to help with your conservation efforts, your last challenge, and this for me is the hardest part, is to try to achieve that visual impact that everyone wants in their landscape. Excuse me while I take a sip of water. So if Earth Kind landscaping promotes appropriate plant selection for a growing area, these landscape design principles help us achieve the visual impact using the plants that we've chosen. And just keep this picture in mind. You know, the kinds of things you want to try to achieve with landscape design include the list that you see here. Accent, well, that's your focal point. It could be a garden accessory or an unusual plant, or the use of contrasting colors, forms, and textures. You want to achieve balance. Balance can either be symmetrical. On two sides of your front door, you plant the same things, for example, or you could take an asymmetrical approach, which uses different elements, but they're balanced in size to get an equilibrium. You want something called line. Well, what's line? Line is the curvature of your beds, the paths of your walkways and entryways. Those lines guide the viewer through the yard. When I look at this picture, my eye goes right to the back. I want to walk down that line and get to the back of this property. Rhythm and repetition, that means using features at regular intervals. And, you know, plants of the same color, form, shape, or texture. And you can see that going on in here. You see repetition of, you know, I see threes. That's a good number. 3 purples, 3 yellows, 3 pinks. Scale and proportion. That refers to the size of your landscape elements in relationship to each other, using all 3 dimensions, breadth, depth, and height. I think you see that here. Do you want simplicity or complexity? In landscape design, it's sometimes said that less can be more. You try to achieve texture. Well, what's that mean? Well, it's a contrast between smooth and rough bark, for example, or the size and the shape of flowers and leaves. One thing that comes to mind when I look at this picture is that we see a lot of things in bloom, but if I know plants, I'll bet you they're not all in bloom all year long. So when plants are not blooming, you're left with their leaves, and that becomes the focal point. So you know, leaf texture and color, all greens are not created equal, you know, using them in your landscape design perpetuates this nice look throughout the seasons. Transition. I think I touched on color by accident, but transition suggests that we gradually alter elements in the landscape design to avoid abrupt changes. And then unity and harmony. We're trying to express a central idea using consistency and repetition of color, form, size, etc. So this is just a random picture I picked up, and I think it helps explain some of these principles of landscape design. For me, this is the hardest part. I still haven't achieved what I would consider a beautiful landscape design in my yard, although I'm really proud of what I have. So, Suma, questions on this section?
Not any.
Okay. The next Earthkind principle is soil improvement. This could be considered the heart of Earthkind landscape management. Soil is the foundation of our landscapes and gardens. It has several functions. It anchors the plants, it retains water and nutrients and air. There has to be air in the soil. And it provides an environment for microorganisms that interact with plant roots in the exchange of nutrients. So don't we take our soil for granted? Who knows whether their soil is good? I mean, when they built our houses, everything that was there before was probably destroyed, and the property was graded, and some other soil was brought in and put on top. And I don't know, we don't start out in a happy place, I'm afraid, when we start out with a new house. But the good news is you can understand something about your soil by having it tested. I'm not going to go into detail about this today, but I want you to know that you can go to the website soiltesting.tamu.edu and learn all you need to know about how to do this. It's very simple to do. The instructions are there. You can use a Ziploc bag and a padded envelope to send a small soil sample to Texas A&M's soil testing laboratory. And what you get back is an analysis of what's in your soil, the macro and the micronutrients, and specific recommendations as to what fertilizer, if any, you need to apply. The trick to this is that you're sampling a particular part of your property. In other words, if you want to see how the soil is under your lawn, you take a soil sample from your lawn. If you want to test the soil in your vegetable garden, you test it there. You don't commingle them. When you submit this test, you're telling the soil testing lab what it is you're growing in the place that you took the soil sample. This is an excellent way to be sure you're not overusing fertilizers. It's very tempting just to go to the hardware store and buy a sack of balanced fertilizer and come home and apply it. But what if you don't need that extra phosphorus or potassium? The problem is that if it's not needed, we have heavy rains, it can run off and contaminate water supplies. So knowing something about your soil helps you know how to maintain your landscape where fertilizer and other soil additives are concerned. Now, Earthkind Landscaping recommends that the best way to improve soil is to use compost. Compost offers the best balance of benefit, effectiveness, and value because it results from the decay of once living organisms and their byproducts. It already contains most, if not all, of the nutrients necessary for plant growth. You know, plants grow and they take up nutrients from the soil, and when they die, those nutrients are still in the dead leaves or the grass clippings, for example. When we compost those materials, we can return the nutrients back to the soil. And remember that real world effectiveness example, because in nature, composting happens after plants die, leaves drop from trees, those organic materials break down, which returns the nutrients they contain to the soil. And that's compost. So this comes back to Earthkind principles of reducing our yard waste going to landfills. Earthkind tells us, use those materials at home, convert them to beneficial use, and reduce your reliance on store-bought fertilizers. These are the benefits of compost incorporated into the soil. As I've mentioned, it releases nutrients. Most of us have clay soils in the Fort Bend County area. Clay soils are fine. They're not bad soils. Their drawback is that they're heavy and drainage doesn't happen very easily. But if you incorporate compost into a clay soil, it improves the structure of the soil, allowing the soil then to drain more effectively. If you have sandy soil, on the other hand, the opposite happens. Nutrients aren't held in sandy soil and water runs right through it. Well, if you add compost to sandy soil, you increase the sandy soil's water and nutrient holding capacity. You're also enhancing the number and diversity of soil microbe populations. You know, our soils are alive with life. And it's said that if we feed our soils, the soils will take care of our plants. And there's a lot of truth in that. There's a relationship between microbes in our soil, the roots of our plants, exchange of nutrients occurs between them, and having soils that are alive with good microbes is important. And you can achieve that with additions of compost. And then, of course, plants like growing roots in these kinds of systems. If you were starting from scratch today to build a new planting bed, it's recommended that you incorporate 3 inches of fully finished compost into the existing soil. And if you're working in clay, you would build that soil up, like mound that amended soil up into what's called a raised bed. Whether it's bordered or not, it doesn't matter. You just want to enable it to drain better. And then after planting, add a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. So I think that brings us to the end of this section. Suma, do we have questions
Yeah,
about soils?
Peggy, do you remember how much is the soil test cost?
The cost of a soil test, if memory serves, may be $12.
Okay,
Thank you for asking. I haven't looked on the website in a little while, but that's
yeah,
what
me too.
comes to mind.
Yeah.
I can't be off by more than $1 or so. And it gets more expensive depending on what you want. But for the average homeowner, you're just looking for a basic soil analysis. If you were a commercial grower, a farmer, you might get a much more elaborate sample, which could cost more. But for us, you're looking at about $12. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other question is, do they analyze for any pathogens like bacteria and virus?
I don't know the answer to the question, but if you visit the website, you will see there will be a list of all the things you want tested. And possibly there are some tests for pathogens, if that's what you're getting at.
Okay.
If the questioner is getting at. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's knowable. Just visit that website, soiltesting.tamu.edu.
Okay.
And when you see the form, for requesting your soil sample, you'll be able to see whether or not you want them to test for anything but the standard, nitrogen, phosphorus, the macro and the micronutrients. Yeah, which that's a long list of things, but those aren't pathogens necessarily. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next one is, how often should you add compost to the raised garden?
You can use your compost as a top dressing, and there's no prescribed how often.
Yeah.
More is better. Once a year, if you have a lot of compost, you can side dress your major plants, in your flower beds with some compost. Compost, and mulch kind of go hand in hand. So as often as you like. Compost doesn't burn things. It's not like putting, chemical fertilizers on plants. If you're happy with the growth of what plants you have, and they're performing for you, you're doing it right. But definitely use your compost. Yeah, use it. But there's not a prescribed. If I had to give a recommendation, I'd say once a year, but that's just a cuff. Certainly doesn't have to be more frequent than that, because compost is a slow release, so slow working organic fertilizer is what it is. So it's not used up by the plant right away. Okay.
And I think this is a question. I think they're asking, what's the benefit of organic humus and manure?
The benefit of what, Suma?
Organic humus and manure.
Send that one to our hotline. I don't
Yeah.
really feel competent to get into the specifics of that.
Yeah.
Manure can be used. You don't want to use it when it's hot.
Yeah.
It can be added to compost. if you have a compost bin or a compost pile, I think it's a good, it's acceptable to add some to, your compost pile, which might include your grass clippings. It might include your kitchen scraps. Composting is a whole nother topic in and of itself, but you'll find resources on Aggie Horticulture as to how to do it. But everything that you put in there, those organic materials, when they become compost, then you're benefiting. But beyond that, I don't feel able to give a better answer. All right, the next earth-kind principle has to do with efficient irrigation and rainwater catchment. Yes,
One more question. How long does a soil test take?
a couple of weeks. A week to 10 days, maybe 10 to 14 days. I have a friend, a master gardener friend, who submitted his soil sample, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I know he has it back. He sent it to me recently. So there may be certain times of the year when the lab gets a little behind schedule, but it's pretty quick. This is a good time of year to take it, because with spring coming and you're thinking, I need to fertilize, this is a great time of year to send the soil sample in. And that way, when you get your results, you'll be buying just exactly what you need for your fertilizer needs.
Okay. There was one other question. How do you keep fire ants out of a raised vegetable garden?
I wish I had the answer to that question, because I struggle with it all the time. Fire ants love raised beds. There is a product that is safe for use in vegetable gardens. It's a bait product containing spinosad. It's called Come and Get It. Come and Get It. It works like Amdro. It's a fire ant bait, but it's safe. It's labeled for use in vegetable gardens. So I use it in mine. Just like anything else with fire ant baits, you apply it and it seems to work on that particular mound, but then just wait a few weeks and you'll have a new one. So I don't think anybody's yet found how to win the battle completely of fire ants.
And
But-
that's not generally in big box stores. Come and Get It. It's, I think, more in garden centers and in Southwest Fertilizer.
And it can be ordered, I believe, through Amazon. I think I've ordered it.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions now.
Thank you. Those are good ones. Okay, moving on to the next earth-kind principle, which has to do with water conservation. We'll talk about efficient irrigation and rainwater catchment. Of course, we all depend on having an adequate supply of clean water. And how often do we take for granted that it's going to be there when we open the tap? And as I've already mentioned, there are times when our water supply is under pressure, especially during droughts. Much of the water that we put on our landscape is either used inefficiently, meaning it's running off, or we're planting things that just demand too much water. So the key is we need to give our plants enough, but not too much water. And while this picture is certainly an extreme example, and I certainly hope it was staged, it's been shown by the researchers that we homeowners do tend to overwater. Because let's face it, our plants don't have any way of telling us that they've had enough. We tend to have, some of us have automated irrigation systems that are set up on timers, and they just run when we tell them to. So Earth-Kind Landscaping recommends that we look for ways to be more conscious of conservation in using our irrigation water. And I've already mentioned we can use hydro-zoned irrigation system. That's what I talked about earlier, where this, let's say this flower bed is full of plants that have similar water requirements. so that when we turn on the zone in our irrigation system to water that flower bed, we're responding in terms of the frequency and the amount of water that we're delivering based on those plants' needs. If we put a water-loving plant next to a drought-loving plant or a drought-tolerant plant, one of them is not going to be very happy if it's all getting the same amount of water. So if you're going to make a new bed or maybe reconsider remodeling some of your beds, do a little research and understand whether you're growing drought-tolerant plants or not, and try to group them together. The other thing we can do is if we're using spray head irrigation, we can convert those to drip irrigation. Drip irrigation simply means we're applying water to the soil slowly. The drip lines are on the ground. It's putting the water right there at the root zone where the plant can take it up. It's said to be at least 90% efficient in the use of that water compared to sprinkler irrigation, which might be only 50 to 70% efficient, because when you're spraying water into the air, you're losing a lot to evaporation. And the wind is sometimes carrying it away from the very plants that you're trying to water. So that's an Earth Kind landscaping principle, to convert our sprinklers to drip. And then, we have to be smart. We should water only when plants need water, not by the clock or by the timer. And you can figure this out. Purchase an inexpensive moisture meter, a probe that you stick into the soil 6 or so inches, and it tells you whether that soil is dry or wet or moist. Remember too that when we deliver an inch of water to our landscape, that inch of water can penetrate at least 6 inches or up to about 6 inches into the soil, which is a good thing. That's the root zone, that top 6 inches. But sometimes with our clay soils, trying to get that inch of water distributed to our lawn, for example, or a flower bed, the clay soil doesn't take it up quick enough. And so it accumulates and it will run off. Well, a way to solve that problem is to use what's called a soak and cycle method, which is to say, you water for a little while, then you stop and move on to another site, and then you come back and water again at the first site after the water you put on has had a chance to soak into the ground. You're just trying to prevent runoff. If we water during the heat of the day, we're losing a lot of water to evaporation, which is why it's recommended we water before 10 and after 6. Now, clearly we're talking about summertime mostly here. This time of the year, it's rare that we need to apply supplemental watering. If you're establishing new plants, they might need more water during their first week or two of being in the ground. So, treat them individually as opposed to watering everything too much. Don't create runoff, and keep an eye on your irrigation system. If your system's set to go off in the mornings before you're out of bed, you could have something like this picture happening and not even know it for a while. And track rainfall. I think that's an important thing. Have a rain gauge. If we're getting an inch of rain a week during the growing system, that's probably all our lawns and gardens need. And in the wintertime, we probably don't need to even add any supplemental water unless it hasn't rained for 3 weeks or so. Now we're going to have a class on irrigation. If you're interested in this, the Landscape Success class on irrigation will be held on May the 19th. So rainwater harvesting is another water conservation method, obviously. It can save us money, reduce our water bill, reduces the demand on the municipal water supply. And there are two ways to harvest rainwater. One of them is collecting it in containers, or we can use rain gardens. And I'd like you to note this website, rainwaterharvesting.tamu.edu, full of information on this subject. Here at the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners Demonstration Gardens, we have a vegetable demonstration and teaching garden that you see here, with a 25 by 25 foot structure with rain barrels on each of the four corners. And the total capacity of those four rain barrels is 1,625 gallons. Those collection systems are connected to these raised bed vegetable gardens that use drip irrigation to apply the irrigation water. We are also tied into the city's water supply so that if it's not raining enough, we can fill those barrels with city water to accomplish what we need in the vegetable gardens for irrigation. If we get just over 3 inches of rain, we can fill those tanks. And with Rosenberg getting about 46 to 48 inches of rainfall every year, we have the ability to capture 17,500 gallons a year. That's taking some pretty nice pressure off the public water system for use in a garden, and reducing the water bill in the process. Now, that might be too industrial a size rainwater collection system for your home use, but there are other ways to go about it. Homeowners have used these rain barrels and collected rainwater from a downspout that they use, say, to fill watering cans to water their potted plants. There are all kinds of ways to do this. The thing to do would be, if you're interested in this, to visit this website. So the other way to conserve water is to use rain gardens. So what's a rain garden? Well, it's a garden that's going to capture some of the runoff from your rooftop or your driveway or your lawn. And by capturing it, it's going to slow that water down to be soaked up into the soil, preventing it from entering storm drains. And that's important because stormwater runoff carries pollutants with it that can end up in our water systems. And when we capture it and keep it in our landscape, those soil microorganisms can help to degrade many of the contaminants that might be in our stormwater. And so we're naturally purifying the water and recharging the groundwater system. This is kind of a cool thing, I think, because a lot of the pollutants that are transported by rainwater come from chemicals and fertilizers that we use on our lawns and gardens. So by having a rain garden, we can move from being part of a problem to being part of a solution. One residential rain garden can benefit the landscape, the neighborhood, the watershed zone, and the regional environment, and also be a beautiful garden that you can enjoy. So instead of this happening off of any property, you could end up with something that looked like this. If you're interested in rain gardens, visit the website that I'm showing you here. There's a good publication available on rain gardens. And here's another picture of one. They're typically planted with native or adapted plants that can tolerate both being waterlogged for, say, 48 hours and then drying out completely if it doesn't rain for many weeks at a time. And so, you know, there'll be a plant list of recommended plants to use in rain gardens if you've got a spot in your yard that you'd like to create one on. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to keep moving along and we'll come back to questions in just a bit.
Okay, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, the next earth-kind principle is the effective use of mulches. Of course, a mulch is a layer of non-living material that we put on the soil surface around our plants. And using a good organic mulch that we replenish once or twice a year is a crucial element of landscape, earth-kind landscaping. It's probably one of the easiest earth-kind principles to adopt. It's high impact and it's low tech. It shades the soil from the sun and serves as a physical barrier to evaporation. The soil underneath your mulch can be 30 degrees cooler than bare soil. And since most weeds germinate in the top layer of the soil, a good 3-inch layer of mulch will tend to, quote, suffocate them or prevent them from germinating. Mulch even protects our soils and our beds from erosion from heavy rains. And mulches, since they're organic, they break down just like compost, and they end up providing more nutrients to the soil. They actually do compost in place. There are lots of organic mulches available for our use. The advice is to use one that you can afford and that pleases you aesthetically. Hardwood mulch is the one that you see used most often, but you see other choices here that you can use. And then lastly, the last earth-kind principle is appropriate maintenance. If you follow the earth-kind principles we've talked about so far, you can reduce the amount of maintenance required in your landscape. Pruning is one of those maintenance chores. It's important to know when and how to prune, and that depends on the type of plant you're talking about. Are you talking about trees or roses or salvias or azaleas? Do it at the right time and in the right way. The only exception to that rule would be to remove any dead or diseased wood. You want to do that at any time. But generally speaking, you want to minimize pruning, because when you're pruning wood that is alive, you're creating a wound opening, and that can be an entry point for a pathogen that could harm your plant or your tree. And of course, study the plant's natural form and try to follow it in your pruning. The other maintenance that we deal with a lot in the growing season in the summertime, and probably one of the most time-consuming maintenance tasks, may be lawn maintenance. Earth-kind landscape management recommends maintaining our turf grass at a greater height for water conservation. St. Augustine grass, for example, it's recommended that it be maintained, that the mowing height be between 2.5 and 3.5 inches. Think about that. When you mow your lawn shorter than that, it's going to need more water, because the shorter grass blades expose more of the soil surface, which facilitates evaporation of moisture from the soil. And then if you can leave your grass clippings on the lawn, as they decompose, they're going to add nutrients and organic matter back to the soil. You're actually fertilizing your lawn when you mulch mow your grass clippings and leave them in place. Grass clippings have been analyzed, and they contain about 2 to 3% nitrogen by volume, as well as phosphorus, potassium, and other plant nutrients. But if you have to bag them, don't send them to the curb if you can help it. Try to compost them. And then I think lastly, that I will mention today, the maintenance chore is pest management. It's another maintenance function. And earth-kind landscaping recommends adopting integrated pest management, which it integrates cultural and biological and chemical controls to prevent or address pest problems. It emphasizes prevention and monitoring, and it advocates the use of chemicals as a last resort. It's ecologically based, It considers all available tactics, not just grabbing pesticides. It's very personalized because it depends on your tolerance level of how much damage your landscape can sustain. And it's very proactive. You're preventing pest problems when you practice integrated pest management. It's always talked about as the IPM principle. Pyramid. Boy, I'm getting tongue-tied. The integrated pest management pyramid. The foundation of the pyramid is cultural control. This is prevention. You're doing this if you're selecting well-adapted plants and planting them properly and removing debris like weeds that harbor pests. Then up the pyramid, you have some mechanical and physical control methods. That means physically removing the pests from the environment. If you grow tomatoes, you know you can take your container of soapy water out to the tomato plant every morning and knock those stink bugs into the soapy water, and you're mechanically removing them. They'll be dead in 2 minutes. Excuse me, sip of water. You can spray aphids off of plants with a sharp spray of water from your garden hose. You can use sticky traps. Those are examples of mechanical and physical control. Biological control means just let the good bugs fight the bad bugs. There are natural enemies of pests in our landscapes, things like spiders and lacewings and lady beetles and ground beetles, and bacteria and fungi and nematodes and viruses and parasitic wasps and flies. There are a lot of good things flying around and crawling around in our yards. And if we just let them all live, if we get in balance, the good bugs will take care of the bad bugs as a rule. But if things get just too bad and we can't stand it anymore, we resort to chemical control. It's the very top of the pyramid. It's the thing we should do last after these other things have failed. And we should select insecticides that have minimal effect and that target the pests that we have. Things like insecticidal soaps or microbial insecticides, for example, insecticides that are based on bacillus species. And of course, always we use according to the product label. So that concludes my discussion of Earthkind landscaping principles. But remember when I was previewing the Aggie Horticulture webpage, the Earthkind page, I want you to go back and do this if I've captured your attention. Take what they call the Earthkind Challenge. This is kind of a quick, fun thing to do. It's just a series, it's a questionnaire that you fill out that describes which of these cultural practices and principles that you're using at home in your own landscape. And then it's going to score you based on your response, and you're going to get a score that ranges from 0 to 100. And the higher your score, the more you'll know you're doing to help preserve and protect the environment. And then you're going to get some questions that might be marked with a red X and some suggestions on changes that you can make at home to help create a more healthy and a sustainable environment. So this is just for you. Have some fun with it. I've mentioned some of the classes that are coming up in our 2023 Landscape Success series, and here they are on this slide. Just like today, register for them. They'll all be on Zoom, and we'd love to see you back at some more of these classes. I hope I've heightened your awareness today about Earthkind landscaping, but if you have more questions, this is how you can get a hold of us. You can call our hotline at the number that you see here, or you can email us at the email address that you have here. If something's bugging you about your landscape, you can take photographs of it, you can attach them to an email, send them into our hotline, and Master Gardeners here will do the research for you and get back to you with some diagnostics, and some recommendations. Of course, these numbers are on our website at fbmg.org, and you can follow us on social media. Well, we are 1 minute from time.
That was excellent timing.
That's good. I don't know if it's good timing or not. I'm happy to hang around for more questions, but I want you all on this talk to please take this survey, capture this screen for us and take this survey, because your feedback is what tells us what you need so that we can deliver more classes for you in the future. So what more can I say? Do you have questions that I could address, Suma?
There were
Peggy, I have a
couple of-
question for you.
Mhm.
You mentioned all the leaves that have fallen. So we live in an area where we've got very mature trees. So I put the leaves around the bases of the trees. Am I doing harm to the trees by doing that, or is that good for them?
That's excellent. Very good for them. I too do that. I have a very willing husband who will help me gather leaves from very mature trees. And we've started running them through. We have a chipper shredder, and he will run the leaves that we gather through the chipper shredder to break them up a little bit more finely. And then I use them for mulch and I add them to my compost pile. But yes, leaves make very good mulch. Sometimes they can repel water, so you sort of have to watch it. If you run on your lawnmower over them first, or do what I just described by shredding them first, you get more water penetration through them. But leaves are excellent mulch. They can compost in place. They are habitat for insects that are eaten by birds. They have a lot of environmental benefits if we keep them on the landscape, keep them out of our garbage bags and away from the curb. Put those leaves to use.
Okay, that's a good idea about mulching them.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
I think there were a couple of questions about irrigation, but since we have a full-fledged class coming up,
Would you like to mention them? I'm
yeah,
not
sure. So
consider
one
myself-
question is, should we use drip irrigation for turf?
For turf, it can be done, but it would be something you do before you sodded your yard. And I believe that it's not very widely used, but I have seen turf specialists talk about that in some of the training that I've had, so that I know that it is possible, but it's its own. You probably find some resources on Aggie Horticulture's website or Texas A&M's turfgrass website that would help you understand how it's done, and certainly bring that question to the turfgrass class.
And the other question, irrigation question is, are soaker hoses efficient?
Soaker hoses are efficient because they are delivering the water right at the ground level where it can be used. They may not distribute water as evenly as a well-designed drip irrigation system with all of its connections, and I'm searching for the words, but I use soaker hoses. Sure, it's better than spraying water into the air and having it evaporate. Sometimes they dry out. You have to keep an eye on them. They get old and they dry out. They can even crack. And you have a gusher and you don't know it. But yes, soaker hoses are good, efficient irrigation systems.
Okay, can you go back to the slide with the class dates, Peggy, please?
Yes.
And take a picture. You can find this information in our emails that you'll be getting, and also on the website, fbmg.org. And if anybody has any question, you can unmute yourself right now and ask for, I think we can hang around for another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I can.
I have a quick question about these hotlines. So does every county in Texas has a hotline we can approach, or, and if yes, where can we find this contact information for the hotlines?
Master gardeners organizations are organized by county. Do you live in Fort Bend County?
No, I live in Randall County.
Okay. Which county is that, Nadia?
Randall, it's by Amarillo.
Oh. Amarillo.
Oh, Amarillo. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have a county extension service. Look up your county's AgriLife extension service. Google that, and you will get to them. And I predict that, yes, they will have, you have an agent there, like we have an agent here who's in charge of horticulture. His name is Boone Holiday. He's the advisor for the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners. Your county, no doubt, has a counterpart like him, and he or she likely has master gardeners helping them. But even if they don't have a hotline organized exactly like us, that's what your county agent is for. That's what the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service is for, so that you can contact your extension service and bring them your questions and concerns and problems and get their advice on solving them. So
Thank you very much.
thank you for asking, and thank you for joining us from Amarillo.
I see one more question, Peggy.
Mhm.
How to prevent oak trees' roots come out of grass?
You cannot prevent that. When those oak trees were young, their roots were small. And as the tree grows, the root gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon the top of that root is at the surface of the soil, and you're stubbing your toe on it when you walk through your lawn. That is just the nature of the beast. You don't want to add a lot of, you have to be careful. If you think you're going to cover those roots up, you have to be careful not to add too much of anything on top of them, because your soil has to breathe and you don't want to bury the roots too deep. So when I'm there, I mean, I have 30-year-old oak trees, and I do have to watch my step when I'm walking around the yard. It is just, it is part of having a beautiful, mature tree, and we learn to live with it.
Yeah.
You could perhaps create a garden in that root zone. And by that, I mean, you could plant, if you established some plant that grows as a ground cover, it may, grow in and around those roots that are at the top of the grass, but that would mean taking the grass away first. So I'm not sure you accomplish much there, but yeah.
And also in the front yards, homeowners associations are more finicky about taking the grass out.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you all today. I wish I could see you. The bad thing about Zoom is that I don't see the audience, but I appreciate your attention, and I hope I gave you some ideas that you can act upon and some places to go to find more information.
Thank you, Peggy.
You're welcome.
So we just got another message. How do you keep hardwood mulch from becoming compacted?
You fluff it up, as we like to say. I don't think you can prevent that from happening, but part of your routine maintenance should be to take a pitchfork or a a garden tool with tines on it and just poke around in the mulch and fluff it up a little bit so that so that the water penetrates through it, and that's a good thing. There's no preventive measure that you can take that I'm aware of.
Nancy, do you know if we have the link to our last year's presentations somewhere?
To last year's? Yes, we
Yeah.
do.
Okay, is it on the website?
It's going to be put on the website soon. to
Okay,
all
somebody
our-
asked me. Yeah,
For our old videos.
yeah, okay. So soon you
There-
will see the links for that, for all the previous presentations.
Peggy, we also got a message that the Earthkind Challenge page, they were, it's no longer on the server.
Well, I didn't know that. Thank you for pointing that out. That's disappointing to me. I'll check into that, and I'll certainly change my presentation. That's one of the things I didn't test before giving this presentation. I had tested it in last year, and I thought it was still there.
I'm getting it.
You're getting it?
Yeah.
What happens when you touch the link and go to it? Does it take you there?
Answer the questions. Let me make sure that I'm actually getting into it.
Yeah, I
The
got to it
Earthkind
as well.
Landscaping
but-
some. Yeah, it's saying something's missing. So
Okay.
it's on their website. Their link is bad.
All right, I'll report that to them in case they don't know.
Because you can go to the page that says Earthkind Landscaping, take the Earthkind Challenge. And then when you continue on and take the Earthkind Challenge, it gives you the error message.
All right, well, we'll report that to
Agriland.
our friends in College Station. And if you guys will just keep this in the back of your mind, come back to it every now and again and see if it doesn't start working, because it's a fun thing to do. And it teaches you too. For every one of the questions, if you're not sure about what the question means, you've got a little sidebar thing that gives you a description of what they're talking about, and then you can give your answer. And so thanks for pointing that out to us, student, whoever you were.
And there's a very nice compliment, Peggy.
Oh,
Peggy has a wonderful voice for presentations. I enjoyed this session very much from Kathy.
well, thank you. I would have much more fun if I was looking at you guys' faces, but I've enjoyed talking to you, even though I feel like I'm talking to the walls in this room.
So
Thank you.
Suba, our classes from 2022, all the links for the videos are now on the Fort Bend Master Gardener website.
Oh, good.
And so they just have to go to that website and then go under video library. And they can find the links.
Okay, so people who asked about it, I hope you got that information.
And then after a few weeks after each class, the links for the class will go up on the website also.
Okay. Great. Very nice. Well, if there are no other questions,
All right, well, thank you, everyone, for being here.
thank you
back
so
home.
much, Peggy, for doing your magic
You're welcome.
and a great session. So make sure you guys register for the next classes, and it's once a month, and we don't have classes in the peak summer months because everybody's traveling or busy with their lives. And once you register, you'll get the recordings as well. And if you have questions that were not answered, please reach out to our hotline and you will get answers. They will research it for you. Thank you all.